Hello, friends. It's Chapo. Greetings, gang. It's Chapo coming at you for Thursday, June 23rd. I have returned from my Paris sojourn, and on today's hour, I will be relaying all of my witty and trenchant observations on some of the differences between American and French culture, starting with, hey, ice water, look into it, fellas. Just kidding. Just kidding. Today, we're joined by author and journalist Jefferson Morley to talk about his new book, Scorpion's Dance, about the CIA, Richard Nixon, and Watergate. Jefferson, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Will.
So, Jefferson, let's kick it off like this. This June marks the 50th anniversary of Watergate. And, you know, it's a well-told story in American history. You've got all the president's men. And I think most Americans know like a broad story about, you know, the journalists, the burglary, the plumbers, a rogue president. But your book suggests that sort of stock narrative is a little bit more complicated. And what your book suggests is there are a lot more questions about Watergate, particularly as it relates to the relationship between two Dicks, Dick Nixon and Dick Helms, the head of the CIA. So, like, just to start there, like, just in terms of like the general, like, all the president's men style understanding of Watergate, what do you think is lacking from that narrative? And like, what did your books seek to find out?
Well, what's completely lacking from that narrative is the hidden hand of the CIA. And there's this striking scene right at the beginning of All the President's Men when Jim McCord is arraigned in court after the burglars are caught on June 17th, 1972. And the judge asks him his employment, and he says CIA. And there's the 28-year-old Bob Woodward in the front row. He says, holy shit, runs back to the Post newsroom. I later got the telephone log calls from the CIA call center. Somebody calls the CIA like 30 minutes later. It was probably Woodward, and asks the question, who is this guy who works for the CIA? Great story, great start, very exciting. That's the last mention of the CIA in the book, All the President's Men. There might be one or two passing references. So what the story that Woodward and Bernstein didn't get was just how deeply linked the burglars were to the agency. Jim McCord and Howard Hunt were working for the CIA at the time. The CIA denied that to the press, and the press believed it. But in fact, they were working and reporting to Dick Helms. So the hidden hand of the CIA is much greater. The relationship between Helms and Nixon went back much farther. The idea that the CIA was kind of the innocent bystander to a lawless president, that was just a cover story.
Well, let's get into this relationship. Like I said, like the relationship between Richard Nixon and his CIA director, Richard Helms, is really a lot of like the meat of this book. Richard Nixon as a personality, as a character, has been psychoanalyzed at depth. I mean, he's been portrayed on film and in fiction many times, but a lot less is known about Richard Helms. So, like, if you had to describe, like, where did Richard Helms come from? How did he get involved in the agency? And how would you generally describe him as a director of intelligence and sort of as a person? How would you describe his character?
I mean, Dick Helms was a consummate intelligence professional and covert operator. He didn't get the name, the man who kept the secrets, for no reason. He kept a lot of very nasty secrets for the U.S. government, and that's why he was prized. Served almost 7 years as CIA director, one of the longest tenures of any CIA director. So he's remarkable in that regard. And the only CIA director ever convicted of a crime. He's distinguished in that way, too. Helms came from a very polished family on Philadelphia's main line. His father was a executive in the Aluminum Company of America. His grandfather was the first head of the Bank of International Settlement. So he comes from this family almost of like international capital and journalism. And then during World War II, moves into secret intelligence work, falls in love with the dirty trick side of the house, and joins the CIA on day one in 1947. The interesting thing about Helms is he was this very polished East Coast guy, bit of a snob and all of that, but he intuited how to get along with a guy like Nixon, who was very insecure from the West Coast, envious, resentful, wanted to be part of the Eastern establishment at the same time that he wanted to destroy it. And Helms really manages him during Nixon's first term. I found these letters. Helms write these little notes. Mr. President, you're such a great statesman. I couldn't have. Your speech last night was so admirable, and he really flattered him. And so they worked together. And while they were culturally very different, politically, they were hand in glove. Helms was a hawk on Vietnam, despite what his own staff was telling him, which was that the war was hopeless and couldn't be won. Helms supported expanding the war into Cambodia, and this is important in terms of the context of Watergate. Helms supported Nixon's efforts to expand domestic surveillance, including the use of political burglary, black bag jobs. Nixon sought the legal authority to do this, and Helms backed him up. Ironically, it was J. Edgar Hoover, the reactionary head of the FBI, who was the one who had civil liberties concerns and didn't want to do it. So Helms, in some regards, was more hardline than J. Edgar Hoover when it came to advancing Nixon's agenda. None of this story is included in, kind of the Watergate mythology of all the president's men, that the CIA was the Watergate enabler.
And like in reading just sort of the background and biography of Richard Helms, I mean, you touched on it a second ago, but like very like from a blue blood like Philadelphia family, he seemed to embody the type of person that Richard Nixon despised and resented his entire career. So how did Richard Helms sort of ingratiated? He sort of sensed that and ingratiated himself to him by kind of flattering his need to be accepted by this very like upper crust, a power elite.
Yeah, because Nixon often, you hear him mumbling on the tapes, maybe we should get rid of Helms, instinctively, that's what he wanted to do. But Helms hung in there and managed to do this. And I think it was his hawkish policies that endeared him. And one other thing, let's not forget, it was Helms who provided Nixon with the burglars. And this is why I think one of the more significant things I point out in the book. A year before Watergate, Bob Haldeman the chief of staff, Nixon's chief of staff, has a conversation with Nixon. Nixon's in a rage because Daniel Ellsberg has just leaked the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times. And he wants somebody to go after him the way he went after Alger Hiss. And he's saying, this guy could do it, that guy could do it. And Haldeman says, well, there's this guy Hunt. And Helms says he's quiet, ruthless, and careful. He's on our side. He knows the fight. It was Helms who recommended Hunt to Nixon personally. And then the next day, Howard Hunt is on the White House staff. So that's how intimate the connection was between the CIA and the burglars. And from Helms's point of view, understand this is perfectly natural. The president comes to you and says he needs something done. You do it. You don't ask questions. That was Dick Helms's credo. You go with the president or you get out of government. So when Nixon wants a burglar or a dirty trickster, Helms is ready. Take my old friend Howard Hunt.
So I want to get to the relationship between the CIA and Nixon, but like the interesting thing here is that in terms of the burglars, is Watergate was the last of a series of political burglaries that the plumbers did. Could you describe what were the previous operations that these guys were used for as part of Nixon's plumbers and dirty tricks team?
Yeah, I uncovered part of the story. It's still shrouded in official secrecy, but yeah, Watergate wasn't the only break-in that the burglars did. Howard Hunt had gone to Miami in the spring of 1971 and started recruiting his Cuban friends for national security missions. And that was even before Ellsberg. So this was something that was on the table and they wanted to get done. They wanted somebody with the capacity to go after the president's enemies. And so these national security burglars, one of them was Frank Sturgis, a kind of a heavy muscle guy from Miami, quite an ominous character, actually, a killer. And Sturgis told the FBI that he knew of 7 different operations against Chilean government offices in Washington and D.C. At that time, the Chilean government was headed by Salvador Allende. The CIA was seeking to undermine it. So it made sense that they would be trying to do these break-in jobs and get that. And so that's a side. We know that happened. We don't know, What did they get out of it? The Chileans never wanted it investigated because they didn't trust the Americans. But we see that there was a political burglary team operating in 1971 and 72, jointly sponsored by the White House and the CIA. And we know that because the Cubans among the burglars said that we were recruited for a joint White House CIA operation to do national security missions, and that's what they did. These were a wide variety of things: go after the president's enemies, go after the United States enemies in Latin America. It was all on a spectrum. They wanted to get it done.
Could you talk a little bit more about the burglars, and not just their connection to the agency, but their connection to all of the kind of Cuban counter-revolutionary activities going on in like Florida and Louisiana at the time that is also tied into the Kennedy assassination?
Yeah, so now we're getting to the deep backstory, and that requires understanding who Howard Hunt was. Howard Hunt was a very talented writer, came from upstate New York, went to Brown University, wanted to be a writer. He even got a Guggenheim, much to the end.
What kind of writer was he? Was he a novelist or
a novelist? Yeah, he got a Guggenheim, and like Truman Capote and Gore Vidal got turned down that year. They were very envious. They were very envious of Howard Hunt, and he wasn't a bad writer. He was a prolific writer, and he wrote 2 books a year for practically the rest of his life. The guy couldn't stop writing in a lot of ways. But anyway, smart guy, joins the CIA, creative Cold Warrior. He one of the first things he does is he secures the rights to George Orwell's Animal Farm and helps produce the cartoon version of it, tweaking the message to be a little more anti-communist than Orwell had it. He played a leading role at the Bay of Pigs, which of course ended disastrously. So when Hunt is hired by the White House, he brings the guys who he's been working with the longest. The first one was a guy named Bernard Barker. Macho Barker had been his deputy during the Bay of Pigs operation. Hunt was the chief of the political wing of the attempted invasion, and Barker was his deputy. Hunt was also an assassination specialist. Hunt was going to assassinate Fidel Castro in March 1961 as a prelude to the investigation. Cuban security broke that up, and a lot of his men went to jail. So, Howard Hunt had these connections there. Frank Sturgis was kind of a soldier of fortune, also involved in plots to kill assassination. Hunt brought him along as well. And then another guy, Muscalito, Rolando Martinez, who was a boat captain, who led CIA infiltration and terrorism missions, a couple of hundred of them, in fact, over the years. So these guys were the agency's heavy hitters in the anti-Castro operation. Gordon Liddy was very impressed after he came back from his first meeting with Howard Hunt when they went to recruit these guys in Miami. And Liddy wrote this in his book. He said Hunt later told him that of the men they interviewed, they were responsible for 22 murders, including 2 men hung from a beam in a garage. That's an exact quote from Gordon Liddy. So the Watergate burglars, that's the other thing about the sort of the sugar-coated version. This was a nasty bunch of guys.
I want to just go back real quick. You talk about Howard Hunt's novels. You said he's actually a pretty good writer. What are his novels like? I mean, do any themes emerge in them that are relevant to the story?
Oh, absolutely. One theme that emerges is, Hunt wrote a lot of different novels. He, at the behest of Helms, he started writing spy novels in 1960. Well, in 1964, Ian Fleming had just died. And so Helms thought, well, maybe Hunt can become the Ian Fleming of the CIA. So he gives Hunt a year off to go write these novels, and he cranks them out. And they involve the American 007 was a character named Peter Ward. He was not exactly as attractive as James Bond, but Hunt tried very hard. And in these books, Peter Ward takes his orders from a magnificently impressive deputy director named Avery Thorne. And as you read the books, the Avery Thorne character recurs. It's Dick Helms. And it's hero worship. Helms was his hero in life because he was such an accomplished, masterful spy. Howard Hunt idolized Dick Helms in his books. That was an interesting insight into his character.
He also wrote a book in the 70s where the bad guy is a thinly veiled version of Teddy Kennedy, who is also a Satan worshiper.
Oh, really? I never read that one. I mean, the guy wrote
real
70 books in his life, so it was pretty hard to read them all.
That would be good though, like an American early CIA version of James Bond, where he suavely walks up to the bar and orders a tall glass of milk. He's one of those early CIA agents who's like a teetotaling Catholic for some reason.
Peter Ward was suave in a very outdated 60s way. He wore like those golf shoes and smoked a pipe. Howard Hunt smoked a pipe, and his heroic alter ego Peter Ward also smoked a pipe. Yes, there's a lot of loving descriptions of different cuisines across Asia. Some fetching females who usually turn out to be treacherous communists. In fact, invariably turn out to be treacherous communists.
Just imagining Peter Ward chatting up a sexy Russian defector. My name is Peter Ward. That name again, Peter Ward. Just one more time.